Hello, Dr. Driver here. Giving you a little background on Chaucer's Troilus and Criseyde. It was completed before 1388. It's usually described as a long narrative poem, Troilus and Criseyde. It survives in 16 manuscripts and 3 early printed editions. So it seems to have been quite popular. We don't know what has been lost, and we also don't know the exact date of writing. Some sources describe it as a novel, which it is in a way, but purists who study English literature say the novel was not invented until the 18th century. But certainly it is a long narrative poem focusing mainly on 3 characters, and it is also a long debate about the nature of love. It's Chaucer's longest sustained narrative at 8,239 lines. Oh, my slideshow. Okay, next one. At the end of Troilus, at the end of the poem, Chaucer dedicates the work to his friends, the philosophical Strode, to whom with moral gower it is directed for correction. This is almost certainly the Londoner Ralph Strode, a lawyer who died in 1387. Another possible indication of date of composition is the allusion in Book 3 to a rare planetary conjunction, which apparently took place on June 9, 1385. It would seem most likely, since Chaucer was an expert in astronomy, among other subjects, that this was deliberately made in the course of the writing of the poem. This is the description of a particularly heavy flooding rain that enables the lovers finally to consume their affection, with a lot of help from Uncle Pandarus, whose name then becomes Pander later, and a pander in contemporary language is called a pimp or a John. Chaucer's main source was Giovanni Boccaccio's poem Il Filostrato, which means struck by love or overwhelmed by love or knocked out by love, whatever translation you made, prostrate by love. All of those are meanings for Filostrato. And as you recall, Chaucer served as an emissary to Italy more than once, and he spoke Italian as he grew up in the vintner or wine merchant neighborhood of London. There is no evidence, however, that on any of his Italian trips he actually met Petrarch, the poet who died in 1374, though he says he met Petrarch, or Boccaccio, who died in 1375, but he may have heard of them, and he found manuscript copies of their works. He also seems to have read Dante. Petrarch's Latin version of the Griselda story forms the basis for Chaucer's Clerk's Tale, and this is where Chaucer says he also met Petrarch, and he also employs in the Troilus Petrarch's vernacular love poetry, and Petrarch really is the father of the sonnet. So you may know the Shakespearean sonnet. Petrarch starts writing these about 200 years before Shakespeare in Italy. So Chaucer incorporates some Petrarchan poetry into his Troilus poem. And from Boccaccio, who wrote the Decameron and the Filostrato, among other works, Chaucer took quite a lot of material, and he seems to have possessed copies of Boccaccio's manuscripts that he was working from in translation. So this is before copyright. He never mentions Boccaccio, though, which is kind of interesting. It's possible that his manuscript, or the manuscripts he had of Boccaccio, did not have an author's name on them. So the Troilus, and this is the frontispiece from the copy of Troilus, where Chaucer is shown as a young man in a pulpit reciting his poem to Richard II and company. This is from Cambridge, Corpus Christi Manuscript 61. Um, the Troilus is a meditation on the many aspects of romantic love, both joyful and sorrowful. It's like a prism. You can see many angles and surfaces as you consider the way the story presents romantic love. There's also comedy in the excessive reaction of Troilus to love, who was a later model for Shakespeare's Romeo, I am sure, and in his creepy and gossipy pal Pandarus, who is Criseyde's uncle, probably a model for Polonius in Hamlet. In Boccaccio's version, Troilus and Pandarus are close in age. In Chaucer's text, Pandarus is a good deal older, but he's a very enthusiastic foil and toady to Troilus, who is a prince of Troy. The story is set during the Trojan War. Here's a little page from the cover of the Philostratto on which Chaucer bases his story of the love affair between Troilus and Criseyde. The story is set in the Trojan War, which you may recall was seen as the great and glorious definitive moment in all warfare, described in Homer's Iliad. The war starts when Paris, another prince of Troy and Troilus' brother, steals Helen, who is married to the Greek warrior Menelaus. She becomes known as Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world. The Greeks sail to Troy and besiege it for 10 years, building their camps outside the city of Troy and doing battle with the Trojans for 10 years. You may also remember how Troy falls. The Greeks, tiring of battle, come up with a scheme to build a giant wooden horse, which the Trojans accept as a gift. Meanwhile, the Greeks conceal themselves within the horse, use the horse to breach the city walls, and burn Troy to the ground. No one escapes except Aeneas, his father Anchises, whom Aeneas carries out of burning Troy on his back, and the young son of Aeneas, who flee to Italy. This is the backdrop of the love story. So Troilus and Criseyde is set during the Trojan War. There's another point. Chaucer writes about the Trojan War as if it is happening in his own modern day, which is the 14th century. The characters are medieval, not ancient. It would be like shooting a film of a Shakespeare play with actors in modern dress or setting a story about the Trojan War in modern New York City. Here's a little scene from the Trojan War. This is a scene supposedly of Criseyde being escaped out of Troy, out of the city of Troy. So the main characters in the story are the narrator. So as in the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer, the narrator, makes an appearance and he comments on the action. He says that he himself has been unlucky in love. Then there's Troilus, a young prince of Troy, who makes fun of love and lovers until he is smitten through the eye by love's arrow, because the sight of Criseyde in a temple affects him to the heart. So it's a description of love at first sight, which is described in ancient texts, but also really developed in the Middle Ages, that you could fall in love at first sight. Troilus represents idealized love, perfect love, also excessive crazy love. Criseyde is a young widow, and she seems older and certainly more experienced than Troilus. She at first rejects the prince's advances. She is likable and complex. Chaucer never judges her for any action or decision that she makes. In a later version of this story, told by the Scottish poet schoolmaster Robert Henryson, called The Testament of Criseyde, Henryson makes Criseyde a leper. Leprosy was thought to be a venereal disease in the 15th century. And he resurrects Troilus, who does not recognize Criseyde in her disfigured state. So he punishes Criseyde, which is lovely, isn't it? And Shakespeare, in his later play, Troilus and Cressida, does something similar, very critical of the Cressida character in that play. But in Chaucer, Criseyde represents practical love, the idea that one can love greatly, deeply, but sometimes it's time to move on. Pandarus, the friend to Troilus and Criseyde's uncle, who should be protecting Criseyde, not promoting his friend's interests, is the third character in this sort of triangle. Pandarus seems smitten with the royal and princely qualities of Troilus. It's like knowing someone famous and making that your priority, not your family. He seems to love Troilus more than he loves his niece. So this might be called a kind of opportunistic love. And finally, there's a fourth character who comes in later in the story, Diomed, who's a Greek hero. He becomes interested in Criseyde because he senses he has a rival in love, and he, of all the characters, is described the most negatively. The poet sometimes presents the story in a dramatic scene with nothing but dialogue. At other times, he will comment on it like a chorus or like a simple onlooker. The poem constantly raises questions of the nature of human love. What is the place of human love in the cosmos? What is the function of destiny, free will, and the human condition? So it has very large philosophical ambitions, this poem does. The Troilus is written in rhyme royal. Each verse has 7 lines in a rough iambic pentameter, or 10-beat lines. The Windiat version you are reading is a prose translation with the line numbers corresponding to the poetry in brackets after the paragraphs. There are 5 books that chart the progress, then the decline of the love affair. These could be roughly described as Book 1, Troilus falls in love. Book 2, Pandarus acts as go-between and Criseyde contemplates the nature of love and whether she will accept Troilus. Book 3, Consummation, the lovers are happy in love after a good deal of machination by Pandarus. Book 4, Fate, or Criseyde's father, and warfare, separate the lovers. Book 5, The Betrayal and Death of Troilus. Today's lecture is on books 1 and 2. Each book opens with a proem or preface to the book before the incipit, or the beginning of the story, except for book 5, which goes right to the action. In book 1, we get the proem, and I ask you to get out your copy of Windiat or your translation of Troilus. I'm going to talk to you about it in Middle English and do a little translation myself, and I'm just opening my book now. Okay, so it opens. Incipit liber primus. Here begins the first book. And here's the Middle English. The double sodaway of Troilus to Telin, that was the King Priamus son of Troy, in loving how his aventures fell in fro woe to weal, and after out of joy, my purpose is, ere that I part from ye, Tisiphone, thou help me for to indite these woeful verse that weepen as I write. So you can tell it's not going to be a happy story, and he's invoking Tisiphone, who's one of the Furies from classical legend, to inspire him. And he goes on and talks about how the narrator himself, is a servant of the god of love, and he hasn't had much luck. So he also asks for sympathy for Troilus. This is about line 26. Thinketh how that ye had felt that love durst you displease, or you had won him with too great an ease. And praise for him that been in the cause of Troilus, as ye may after hear, that love him bring in heaven to solace. Okay, so that love will bring him finally to heaven and comfort him. And ache for me, also for me, I'm the narrator, prayeth to God so dear that I have might to show in some manner which pain and woe as love's folk endure in Troilus unseelie aventure. So here the narrator is telling us he's writing about it to sort of assuage his own romantic pain. So we know this isn't going to turn out too well. At about line 50, the narrator again asks for compassion. For to have of him compassion, as though he were her own brother dear, nor hearkeneth with good intention. For now will I gone straight to my matiere, in which ye made the double sodaways here, in Troilus, in loving of Criseyde, and how that she forsook him ere she died. So how she forsakes him before she dies. So you've got the plot right there. It then develops the plot from those lines. Here's a little picture of Chaucer, the author again. Now, there's a manuscript in the Morgan Library of the Philostrato that's very heavily illustrated. We don't have English volumes that have a lot of pictures for the Troilus. Some of the early printed editions have a few illustrations, a few woodcut illustrations. But here, I'm just going to use, this is Morgan M371, the Italian copy of Philostrato, Blown Away by Love. The plot goes like this. Calchas foresees the fall of Troy. He's the father of Criseyde, and he's a seer. And he goes over the wall and he escapes to the Greeks at night, leaving his daughter Criseyde on her own. At lines 99 to 105, we get the first description of Criseyde. Criseyde was this laddie nam. All right, Criseyde was this lady's name. As to my doom in all Troy's city, nas none so fair, for passing every wight, so angelic was her native beauty, that like a thing immortal seemed she, as doth an heavenish perfect creator, that down were sent in scorning of nature. So she's beautiful, and if nature made one of her, then the mold has been broken. Anyway, she hears all about her father's shame. Her father's a traitor, and she goes to Hector, the chief prince and warrior of Troy, to ask for his protection. We're also told in this part of the text that if we want to read more about the Trojan War, to go to read about it in other sources, and that Criseyde is very well off. She has her own house, and she has many, or a retinue, and she's also loved by one and old. This is about 127. And in her house she lived, with switch many servants, as to her honor need was to hold, and while she was dwelled in that city, kept her estate, and both of young and old full well beloved. So they all loved her. Well men of her told, but whether that she children hadde or none, I read it not, therefore I let it go. So he doesn't know whether, narrates, he doesn't know whether she has children. Anyway, moves on to a description of April, in which the festival to the Palladian, it's a spring festival called, to a relic called a Palladian. It's a statue of Pallas Athena, who's the patron of Troy, and everyone goes to the temple to honor the goddess, including Criseyde. Meanwhile, Troilus is walking up and down. He's described as sort of the leader of a gang of guys. His young knights, this is at 184, his young knights led him up and down and built a large temple on every side. So he's walking up and down with his guys and making fun of love. So he mocks lovers and he makes wisecracks about love, lovers, and the ladies. So this annoys the god of love so much at line 206 that he draws his arrow, aims it, and he hits Troilus full in the heart. This is at 209. For suddenly he hit him at full, and yet as proud a peacock can he pull. So here Troilus is being described as a proud peacock who's being plucked by the arrow of Cupid. The narrator goes on and he talks about how with one look at Criseyde, his heart waxes a fear, it says at 229. Yet with a look his heart waxed a fear that that now was most in pride above, waxed suddenly most subject unto love. And then he goes on, the narrator tells us you should take an example from this man who was once proud and worthy, that love holds all our hearts in thrall. So, for the ensemble talketh of this man, ye wise, proud, and worthy folk as all, to scorn and love, which that so soon can the freedom of your hearts to him thrall. For ever it was, and ever it shall befall, that love is he, that all thing may bind, for may no man fordo the law of kind. No man can break the law of nature. Then the narrator has to go over this moment again, so he backtracks and he has Troilus again walking along, and then he sees the lady at about 268, and then falls in love with one glance. This Troilus of every wight about, every person around, on this lady and now on that looking, and upon cast befell that through a rout through the crowd, his eye pierced and so deep it stent, till on Criseyde it smote, and there it stent. So his glance pierces the crowd deeply until it falls on Criseyde, and there it stops. And suddenly he's astonished, and he says, "Where have you been? Where have you been all my life? Oh, mercy God," thought he, "where hast thou wonted? Where have you been? That art so fair and goodly to devise." Therewith his heart gone to spread and rise, and softly sighed, lest men might him hear, and caught again his first playing cheer. So it goes back to teasing the ladies, but he's well caught in the net of love. Then we backtrack again, having him look at her. At the moment he looks at her, as he's admiring her, she reacts. She sees him. So as he's looking at her, she let fall her look a little aside, and switch manier askance. "What? May I not stonden here?" And after that, her looking gone, she light, that never thought him seen so fair a sight. So, why can't I stand? Oh, what's up with you, pal? What she's saying there. Can't I stand here? Why are you looking at me like that? So her reaction is not exactly positive to this dumbstruck moment that Troilus has. Anyway, Troilus, now in love, goes home to the palace and locks himself in his room, which he does a lot in this poem, and he goes over everything in his mind. He then sings a song, one of several. Here he's looking at her. He sees her and falls madly in love. And there's the Italian header there. And here he's home, pondering what it all means, thinking about love, and he begins to sing a song called the Cantus Troili, Song of Troilus, which is about line 400. Parts of this are taken directly from Petrarch's sonnet, here is a little bit about it. It works through paradoxes. "If no love is, O God, what feel I so?" This is line 400. This is on page 10 of Windiat. "And if love is, what thing and which is he? If love be good, from whence cometh my woe? If it be wicked, oh, wonder thinketh me, when every torment and adversity that cometh of him may to me savory think. For I thirst the more that it drink." So the more I thirst, the more love I drink in. And then he talks about how he is suffering, but also enjoying love. And he describes himself as a boat without a star to guide him. This is taken directly out of Petrarch. "Thus passed to and fro, all stirless within a boat am I, amid the sea, betwixt winds twa, that in contrary stonden evermo. Alas, what is this wonder maladia? For heat of cold, for cold of heat, idea." So for the heat of cold, for the cold of hotness, I die. Anyway, so that's his song. And then Pandarus, his friend, shows up and tries to weasel the information out of Troilus. He sees that Troilus is suffering about something, and there's a long discourse here about love and lovers. Troilus thinks that the lady will never even deign to look at him. He's not very secure. He says it, for example, at line 776, "For all that ever he con, she nil to know such wretch as I be one." So no wretch like I can win her, is what he says. And then many lines later, and Troilus does hold out for a while here with Pandarus and Troilus from the Italian manuscript. He does reveal the name of the lady, and this is on Windiat page 18, and if you're reading along in Middle English, it's at line 873. And look how he describes her. This is 873. "Alas, of all my woe the well, then is my sweet foe called Criseyde, and well nigh with the word for fear he died." So when he speaks her name, he almost passes out. He almost dies from fear. He says that he describes here love as suffering, and this was an idea that was very popular in the kind of practice of courtly love in the Middle Ages. That love is suffering. It's a certain kind of inborn suffering. Says a manual on this that was written in the 12th century. So he's suffering, and he describes Criseyde as his sweet foe, which is interesting. His sweet enemy. Anyway, then the book one ends with the ennobling of the lover. So love ennobles the lover. This is another idea that comes from courtly love. And here we have Troilus at about line 1079. He become the friendliest wight, the gentlest, and eke the most free, the thriftiest, and e'en the best knight that in his team was or might be. Dead were his japes and his cruelty, his high port and his manner estrange, and each of those gone for virtue chance. So he becomes friendly and noble and generous, for he is generous. He's the best knight ever in his time. He's no longer standoffish, rude, haughty, and proud. Okay, so that's the end of book one. Book two opens with a dedication to the muse Clio, who is the muse of history. And there's an interesting meditation about how language changes even if feelings do not. Here at about book two, line 22 or something like that. You know eke that in form of speech is change within 1,000 year, and words though that had a price now wonder niece and strange us thinketh them, and yet they spake them so, and sped as well in love as men now do, eke for to win in love in sundry age, in sundry lawns, sundry bent usage. So here's the idea that language changes, and it certainly has, hasn't it, since 1380s, but the feelings are the same, and yet people still loved as we do now. Interesting little meditation there. And then the book itself, Incipit Liber Secundus, here opens the second book, is set in May, in a May garden, when Pandarus visits Criseyde, who is reading the story of Oedipus, which is not the happiest tale. Pandarus teases Criseyde and tells her to take off her veil and dance with him. Well, she thinks this is a bit rude, actually. He says to her at line about 109, do weigh your barb, which is French for beard, isn't it? But it's veil. Do weigh your barb and show your face bare. Do weigh your book. Rise up and let us dance, and let us do to May some observance. So let us observe the rites of May. And she responds, I, God forbid, quoth she, be ye mad? Is this a widow's life? So God you say, by God, you're making me right sore dread. You've been so wild, it seemeth that you rave. Okay, so she says, this isn't appropriate behavior for widows. I should be, living in solitude and reading holy saints' lives, not in my garden with you. So it's kind of a teasing mock horror, I think, but she's also got a point, because widows were not supposed to be out gallivanting around. Then they talk about the war, and Pandarus begins to manipulate Criseyde, talking up Troilus. He talks about how Hector is the great warrior, and indeed Hector is remembered as the great warrior of the Trojan War, and how Troilus is also a great warrior on the battlefield. And this is lines 204 to 10, if I can find them. And this is in Windiat, pages 26 to 27. There too he is the friendliest man of great estate that ever I saw my life, and where him list best fellowship can, to such as him thinketh able for to thrive. So he's just talking up Troilus, telling her, and he also says, I've got a secret to tell you, but I won't really tell you what it is, because I'm not sure you'll like it. So that goes on, and he actually pretends to leave at some point. He says that she's the luckiest woman alive, but then won't elaborate. So he's really toying with her. And then finally, at about line 316, he tells her that she is beloved by the prince. Now, niece of mine, the king is dear son, the good, wise, worthy, fresh, and free, which always for to do well is his one. The noble Troilus so loveth thee, that but you help, it will his bane be. Lo, here is all. What should I more saying? Doeth what you list to make him live or die. But if you let him die, I will stir. I too will die. Have here my truth, niece. I know not lie, and all should I with this knife my throat curve. With that the tears brast out of his eye, and he said, If that you do us both die, and thus guiltless, then you have finished fair. What many though we both appear. So basically, Pandarus is saying, if you don't love him, he'll die, which is an old trope. Love me, baby, or I'm going to die, is kind of the contemporary or maybe 1960s kind of notion, rock and roll notion of that, still in the culture. But here, Pandarus is literalizing it, and he's saying that Troilus will die if she doesn't love him. And so Pandarus, as Troilus' best friend, will also kill himself, which is interesting, at least. It's a bit drastic. And then he gives a whole bunch of other speeches with the theme Carpe Diem, seize the day. And there's a good one at 392. Think eke how Elda wasteth every hour, and each of you a part of beauty. And therefore, ere that age they devour, go love, for old there will no wight of thee. Let this proverb a lore unto you be. Too late you are, quoth beauty when it passed, for eld daunteth danger at the last. So the idea here is that time is fleeting. Seize the day. Every day you're getting a little older and you're losing a bit of your beauty, and you better allow your beauty to cause you to be loved. You better be open to love, because when you're old, no one will love you. Well, she listens to all of this, and then we get her reaction. She bursts into tears and says, this is about 410, Alas for woe, why ne'er I not dead? Why am I not dead? For of this world the faith is all a goon. Alas, what should strange to me doon, when that he for my best friend he wend? Writ me to love, and should it me defend. So she's basically saying, what is going on here? Why? How can you behave this way? You are my best friend. You're supposed to be protecting my honor. You're not supposed to be urging me to love. You should be defending this man's love. And then she goes on. She elaborates from about 421. What? Is this all the joy and all the feast? Is this your rede, your teaching? Is this my blissful case? Is this the very meed of your behest? Is this all the painted process said, alas, right for this fine? Oh, Lottie, oh, lady, mean Pallas, thou in this dreadful case me to purvey, for so astonished am I that I day. So I'm so astonished I'm overcome and I will die, because I can't believe you want to betray my honor that way. Anyway, they chat further, and then she asks at about line 500, O good M is a Middle English word for uncle, for his love which that us both made, that is God, or the gods. Actually, this is a pagan poem. There isn't Christianity really in this poem. There's a lot of discussion, though, about predestination and fate and other discourse that becomes Christian. But Chaucer's setting it really in a pre-Christian period. She asks him, tell me how first you wist to love his woe. How did you first learn of Troilus' sorrow? So then Pandarus smiles, the text says, and he knows that she's caught. Knows that she's interested. She then agrees that she will love Troilus, but only as a friend, and he can love her from afar, just to save his life, and that's it. And then she goes to her room, and she thinks about love, and she thinks about what love means. And as she's sitting there, she hears cheers going up from the street, and Troilus is passing with the other Trojan heroes down the street, riding down the street, down her street, and she looks out the window and sees him. This is about 624. This Troilus sat on his bay steed, all armed save his head full richly, and wounded was his horse, and gone to bleed. And then it goes on and it talks about sort of excessive against, it's all very exaggerated. His helmet, to hewen was in 20 places. His helmet was cut in 20 places, that by a tissue hang his back behind. His shield to dashed was with swords and maces, in which men may many an artaway find. So his shield's been completely attacked with swords, maces, and arrows, and people are all yelling and cheering. And she looks out the window and she sees him, and at 6:50, that glance she lets, quote, so soft in her heart sink, that to herself she said, who yaff me drink? And that's a reference to Another medieval legend of Tristan and Isolde. The two lovers drink a love potion and love each other forever. So who yaffed me drink? Who gave me this love potion? So she is attracted to him. She feels something for him. But then she goes on and on in her mind, thinking about all the possibilities of love. And she knows her own worth. She says, I'm beautiful. I am well appointed. I have wealth. I have independence. So why should I fall in love? And I think some of the greatest lines are right here, book 2, line 750. Here she says, I am my own woman. I am my own woman. Well at ease, I thank it God, as after Mina's state. Right young and stand untied in lusty lees, withouten jealousy or switch debate, shall noon husband say to me, checkmate, for either they been full of jealousy or masterful or loving novelty. So husbands are controlling. They're trying to win the chess game. They're jealous, or they're dominating, or they love novelty. That means they have other women when you're married to them. So she's saying, why should I put up with this? I'm not really that interested in this. And then she goes off to her garden. Oh, here's another one. Troilus riding by. Very blurry, isn't it? It's, ugh. That's from the Kelmscott Chaucer. She goes off to her garden. This is actually shown inside, so it's not too accurate. But anyway, she goes off to hear her niece, who's Antigone. If you remember the Antigone story, it's not really also a very happy classical story. But Antigone is singing this song about love. And she says it's a Trojan song, and it's about all the joys of love. And it has some important lines as well. And she talks about love as a bath of bliss. This is about line 850. And thanked be ye, Lord, for that I love. This is the right life that I am in. To fleeman all manner of vice and sin, this doth me so to virtue for to intend, that day by day I in my will amend. So love leads to virtue, according to this song. And this is the right life I am in. And when you do fall in love with someone, you often do feel that way. Life is suddenly good. Criseyde then goes to bed. There's a nightingale singing on the cedar tree outside, and she listens to it, and then she falls asleep, and she has this dream that an eagle plucks out her heart and gives her his heart. And this is about line 925. As she sleep a noon right, though her meta she dreamed, how that an eagle, feathered white as bone, under her breast his long claws set, and out her heart he rent. He tore her heart out, and that anon did his heart into her breast gone. Okay, and she has no pain from this. The eagles are usually used as an imperial sign, and the dream suggests that Troilus will love her fully. Okay, then Troilus skips back to the palace and instructs Troilus how to write a love letter. And Troilus has never written one before. He says that Troilus should write clearly and blot his letter with a few tears, and he should not be boring or repetitive. So here's how to write a love letter. This is about 1023. Don't write it, I want you to write it clearly. And he says, make some good arguments, but don't write in an elaborate way, scrivenishly or craftily. And blot it with your tears, but blot it with thy tears, eagle light. And if thou write a goodly word all soft, that would be good. Rehearse it not too oft. Don't repeat. Don't be repetitive. Pandarus then takes this letter to Criseyde. She refuses to take it, and then he then gives it to her by thrusting it into her bosom. This is at 1154. Refuse it not, quod he, and hent her fast. He grabs her, and in her bosom the letter down he thrusts. So he shoves the letter into her bosom, and she reads the letter later, not as shown here in the Italian manuscript, but at her leisure when she's alone. Pandarus then, who he's orchestrating all the action, persuades Criseyde to write Troilus a love letter, and she says she's not doing it. She'll only be his friend, and yet she does eventually write the letter. She writes a letter telling him that she will only be his friend, but Troilus is just happy to have a letter from her. So that's what happens here. Meanwhile, Pandarus comes up with a plot to bring the lovers together. He tells Deiphobus, another of Troilus's brothers, that men have wrongfully seized the possessions of Criseyde, and wonders if Deiphobus can gather with his brothers at the palace to hear what has happened. Then Pandarus runs to Criseyde's house to tell her a new lawsuit has been brought against her. The whole thing's concocted. In any case, Deiphobus invites Criseyde to dinner to discuss this. Meanwhile, Pandarus trots off to, so here he's talking, here's a letter to Criseyde, so there's a lot of exchange. Oops, that's not the one I wanted to show. Anyway, Pandarus trots off to Troilus again and says Troilus has to go to Deiphobus' house the day before and then say he's sick and he has to go to bed. So he'll be in bed when Criseyde is there. So Troilus appears at the palace of Deiphobus the night before the dinner with Criseyde, says he's sick with a fever and he has to go to bed. The next day, the royal family gathers with Queen Helen, who is Helen of Troy, to dine with Criseyde. It's decided that Criseyde must visit Troilus in his sickbed to help heal him, as Pandarus tells her. And often women are seen as healers in the Middle Ages, literally, but also love was thought to heal a lover. So book 2 ends with Troilus in his little bedroom, wondering what on earth he will say to the lady when he finally meets her for the first time, actually gets to engage with her. And the book ends this way. He's lying in his bed thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? So, this was the first time he should her pray of love. Oh, mighty God, what shall he say? That's where book 2 ends. All right, and he's certainly hoping for this. What will happen next?